Welcome to everyone who's joined us for this session where we're going to be discussing how to voice your production and most importantly get it right. So what should you be thinking about when you are adding a voiceover to your video, and how can you ensure that it kind of delivers what you're expecting for your video. This is going to be a 45-minute session, but we're going to save sort of 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So if you do have any questions as we're going through, you can be putting them into our question box, which should be on your GoToWebinar screen. There's a little box for questions, so you can start putting those in there and we will come to them at the end. This session is also being recorded, so if you have to drop off for any reason or you want to recap any of the information, we'll be sending that out probably tomorrow morning, so you will get that as well. But let us jump into some introductions. So my name is Naomi, I'm the Content Marketing Manager at Sparkle, and if you've joined any of these sessions before, you're probably familiar with me, but I'm back again this time joined by Miles, who is the Managing Director and co-founder of Voquent.com, and he is really an expert when it comes to helping brands, organizations, people tell their story with voiceovers, from kind of blockbuster productions through to everyday explainer videos. He's really kind of experienced it all in helping people tell their stories with voiceover. So I'm really excited to have him on today, and I'm sure Miles, I'll hand it over to you to kind of introduce yourself further and get into the content.
Thanks, Naomi. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is, Naomi said, is Miles Chicoine, and I was one of the original co-founders of Voquent. We started a few years ago, back in 2018, in fact. And what we were then and what we are now, I guess, are fairly different things, only because we've grown a lot faster than we originally anticipated. But fundamentally, what our company offers is a wide range of recording and localization and post-production services. And of course, we're best known for our worldwide database of voice actors. And I think in this session, what I'm hoping I can do is offer some useful insights in relation to how you would get your voiceover produced for your production. And I appreciate that there's maybe quite a few of you who might be watching this right now who've done that a lot of times. You might even have more experience than I do personally, although maybe not necessarily exposure to the same level of or volume of voice acting jobs that we perform on a daily or monthly or yearly basis. So I hope that some of the information I provide will be useful. Maybe it'll give you some food for thought if you're really experienced. And of course, if you don't have a lot of experience in it, then this will be a nice way to get acquainted with what's involved and really show just how easy it is and just how much is available to you. So before I get started, I'll just give you a little bit of summary background briefly. If you've never visited our website before, I'm not expecting you to have, but if you haven't, we basically offer an advanced search engine, and it showcases about 60,000 audio demos that are recorded by voice actors on our site. And we kind of provide access really to the largest roster of experienced professional voice actors in the world. And so what that means is that if you're looking for a particular language, or if you're looking for a particular accent, it's pretty much a guarantee that we're going to be able to provide it. We get asked for the most basic things, as you would, like somebody saying, can I get a neutral sounding British RP or standard American accent? But we also get asked to perform or get performers for accents or languages that are maybe only spoken by a few thousand people. It can be really, really niche. And so what it does is it offers a gateway to explore and really understand what's out there and what's available. We know that we're not the only company in the world that offers voiceovers. There's tons of companies that do. What makes us different is the way that we index our samples. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that can be kind of leveraged and used for, even if it's just for an exploration process on your own part, how that might be able to benefit you. So every year we manage and deliver thousands of voiceover projects, and those can range from everything from casting ADR work for a Hollywood film to doing a simple, very basic voiceover for an explainer video or tutorial, or a training video, or it could be for toys or GPS devices or any upteen number of things. Every project is unique, and they all vary in complexity and size. For instance, a single project consisting of casting, I don't know, 1 or 2 voices for a commercial or explainer is very, very different to maybe hundreds of recordings for a global or multi-regional marketing campaign. We've basically got 2 kinds of customers, and we split those between what we would refer to as direct engagements and intermediaries, and they're all equally valuable to us. So when I refer to direct engagements, what I'm talking about is a global corporation that is a huge, well-known brand, maybe one of the biggest brands in the world, who has an internal team or a marketing team inside their company in some place, there might be many obviously, asking us to produce a piece of material for them. That job could, like I said, be small or it could be large. Another classic direct engagement would be a government or public sector body where they may not necessarily go to another very large PR or marketing company or translation company. They may go straight to, I guess, as close as they can get straight to source with us by getting very voiceover specific work done. And we do have increasing numbers of clients that work in governments all around the world. The next type of direct engagement would be educational bodies, charities, universities. That's becoming more and more a frequent client for us, as is private companies. And private companies doesn't just mean private marketing companies. It could be like a computer game developer would be what we class as a private company. Now, when it comes to intermediaries and third parties, we're really well acquainted with working with firms who are ultimately going to be sourcing our work in the work of our voice actors, and potentially a whole bunch of post-production services for their clients. And in that respect, we're more than happy to work with any intermediary or third party to get a job done. And so some of those customers are translation companies themselves, large translation companies. Some of them are marketing and PR firms. Some of those are independent production companies, and some of those are casting directors. And so that gives you a good range of just the spectrum of organizations and people we work with. The voiceover is one of probably the few service sectors that's had an opportunity to grow through the coronavirus pandemic. It's not to suggest that it hasn't been affected by lockdowns, because obviously the amount of camera-based production work that has dropped off the face of the map as a result of lockdowns is staggering. As we all know, we can't watch any decent films or any decent television products. We're watching reruns from 20 years ago. It's really insufferable. But in spite of camera work being reduced, the pandemic has actually been responsible for what I would describe as an explosion of digital content creation. And that's why, I guess, over the last year, we've grown significantly. We realize we're very privileged and we're very lucky to be in that position. There's obviously a lot of people who aren't, a lot of companies that aren't. But what is true is that voiceovers are highly relevant right now, because it goes hand in hand with the development and delivery of digital content, which everybody really relies upon right now to get their message out there and their brand. So before the lockdown, we would have estimated that an average person would hear over 100 voices in a day, even if they never left the house, whether it's from, TV and movies or radio or video games or cartoon animations or telephone systems or what have you. But we're also hearing them more than ever, obviously now, on explainer videos, training courses, internet ads, social media, audiobooks, interactive toys, podcasts. These are all mediums that are all expanding really, really rapidly. And particularly with home working, there's a lot of material that does get consumed from a work perspective, purely for internal corporate work on a near constant basis. So let's get stuck into some of the things that we think we can offer some value with. The first consideration of any new project is, particularly if you've not done this before, is why don't I just use my own voice? And I don't want to ask that question in an obvious sense, because there's plenty of people that maybe wouldn't be well suited to voice work. I think the common misconception about voice work is that professional voice actors somehow sound better, like as people when they speak. And there is some truth to this, I think. I mean, they do it for a living, so it's reasonable to expect that a good voice actor will apply intonations, pauses, inflections, a kind of a polish to your content that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise be able to obtain if you're doing it yourself. But you might have a fantastic, you might be a really accomplished speaker, and there isn't anything from stopping you from doing it yourself. And that's amazing. That's great. I mean, hey, you might even have a career as a voice actor if you decide to really do a lot of it. The problem, of course, is when you record into a laptop or a phone or a USB gooseneck mic in an open space, as opposed to a correctly sound insulated environment where the audio hasn't been. The audio is obviously going to have lots of different reverb, and you're going to have a lot of issues and background noises. That work needs to be prepared by an audio engineer so that the recording itself doesn't sound really mediocre. So people can sound great when you talk to them, but then they record in the wrong environment with the wrong equipment, and they just sound terrible. And this is obviously what drives people to purchase voiceovers. So the danger is, of course, if you are doing it yourself, that you can create a negative perception in your audience. The longer the content plays with poor audio, the more the audience will feel that it's annoying or disposable, maybe distracting, but it definitely has less meaningful value. And something that you might have spent a great deal of time on building, maybe a lot of money put into that, can become really forgettable just because the poor audio is killing it. So it's definitely worth doing a recording, I think, even if it's just for a guide read or what's often referred to as a scratch read. Because if you are going to get a professional voiceover, it can really make a big difference if they know really what you're looking to have said at certain points, or it can also help with pronunciation. I'll come back to that in a little bit. So a guide read or a scratch read is a great way to start, and it's also a great way to build a video. But we would say if you're going to get it done right, then obviously you want to get it done with a professionally recorded environment with the right equipment, because doing so, it really strengthens an emotional bond with your audience. Even if it's a really flat subject, it still creates a bond. And if you've invested a lot of time and resource creating your video content, it's absolutely worth getting that bit right. So if you're producing work for consumer use or internal businesses or promotional purposes, it really just depends. If you want to have maximum impact with your audience, you obviously have to get a professional voiceover done. So the first question that always comes up is, okay, what is the budget? So many of you will already know that the budget you need for a voiceover is going to vary on a lot of different factors. And mostly that's based on how the material is going to be used and how long the content is. Because there isn't really a universal voice acting rate. We get asked all the time, why can't you just have every single person on your site offer voice work for the same rate? Well, because the reality is people determine their own rates. People work all over the world. They work in different countries. They work in different languages. And there's different levels of experience that will command different types of prices. Somebody who's getting started early might be willing to work at a lower rate. And someone who's very good at what they do and has been doing it a long time, you will pay at the higher end of a budget range for that. And we would argue that the more money you spend on voiceover, the greater the output is going to be, and therefore very much worth it, particularly when it usually represents just a fraction of the overall production cost that you're working on. So it's worth not skimping on voiceover just for that. Obviously, if you're seeking out a celebrity where you're going to be paying thousands of pounds, let's be fair, okay? The reason that you're booking them is probably not because of the fact that they have the most amazing voice in the world. You might love their voice, but not everyone will. It's primarily to leverage the influence and the recognized association of that voice with their previous work. It's an endorsement, if you will. And that's what you're paying bigger money for when you do buy a celebrity. So most voice actors aren't celebrities. Most voice actors are rarely known in terms of their names. It's a kind of a sad fact that these tremendous artists aren't really recognized because they're recognized through their brands. that they've represented over the years and years. But really, you just don't need to worry about any of this if you're recording something like a 10-minute corporate training video for internal use. And that's where ranges really start to play an important factor in your thought process. So if you were going to do an internal training video as an example, we would say on the lower end of that, it would be about, I don't know, 270 pounds or so. And if you were at the upper end of that, maybe 450 pounds. And when I say lower and upper, I'm usually talking about the quality and experience of the voice actor. But a commercial will obviously cost more. And that's because a commercial involves the cost of usage. A lot of companies are looking for a blanket usage price so that they can sell, particularly intermediaries, because what they want is the opportunity to be able to provide that to their client. No questions asked. The client can just use that however they like. And we understand the need and the desire to have that flexibility so that the creative process of producing material isn't constrained by all kinds of new cost factors and cost limitations depending on how it's going to get used. But the simple fact is that if you're going to be using paid media and paid promotion for any material, you've got to factor in the fact that the voice actor cost will go up, and that's because there is usage that needs to be applied. And usage is calculated according to the mediums being things like it's going to be on television, or it's going to be on radio, or it's going to be on Facebook, or it's going to be on an internal portal. That's a medium. The territories in which it's marketed, that territory could be local. If it's like, for instance, radio, you have radio spots in different locales. If it's TV, it might be nationwide, or it might be a whole global campaign. And then most importantly is the period of time that it will be broadcast for. And so it's always, we're always asked, we want all rights, all mediums, all territories in perpetuity. The problem with that is that you're paying well over the odds for that flexibility. And in most cases, if you talk to your client about whether that's really required, you'll find out that they're really not. They might talk about the idea that they'd like to use your video for 5 years, but really they're only going to use it for 1 year, or they're only going to use it for 3 months. And therefore, by actually constraining the time, you will save yourself a lot of money in usage. It's not just relevant to us, that is relevant to most parties that you will buy a voiceover from. So, so that leads me into the next thing, which is we appreciate you obviously don't have to use us, Voquent, to commission a voiceover. There's lots and lots of companies, and anyone who's been working in production for a long time, I'm sure there's several of you here, you'll have been getting your voiceovers from a whole myriad of different sources, I imagine, for a long time. And you know, I'm not going to go into the pros and cons of these different organizations and methods. I think you'll all have a good idea of what they are. But as a snapshot, it really boils down to what we would identify as seven different methods. So the first one is non-exclusive voiceover agencies and production houses. That's effectively what we are. We provide a non-exclusive relationship for all our voice actors to work effectively with all our clients. But then you also have exclusive talent representation agencies, and these are obviously smaller agencies and representatives that have a curated number of individuals who are usually very good at what they do, very, very experienced, and they just work with those people. And so if you were going to exclusive talent representation agencies and you wanted to cast the net far and wide, you'd probably need to go to many different talent agencies to get a really large casting, because they won't take on that many people that it sounds similarly. The next one is a music or sound recording studio. If you go to anyone who owns or runs or manages a sound recording studio, they will inevitably have people that they know and work with that you can leverage to get a voiceover done. And so there's certainly no harm in asking somebody if they can provide something for you if you decide to go down that road. And another very common one is a voiceover posting board site. There's tons of these, and they're frequently known in the voice acting community as pay-to-play sites, which is where the actors are effectively paying for the privilege to be able to respond to the job posts that you might put onto one of these sites, with the expectation that you're going to get in maybe 100 or even 200 auditions, and then you can work through those auditions and decide which one you want. There's nothing stopping you from getting auditions from the other parties I've mentioned. We do auditions all the time. So do the exclusive talent representation agencies. The difference is that it's more like going on to like a Gumtree website or eBay and basically saying, here's a listing, who wants a shot of this? And so inevitably you will get stuff that's really good, but you also get a lot of stuff that's really terrible. So if timing is a factor, that's something that you want to consider. You're going to probably have to weed through a lot of stuff that isn't really appropriate. The next and possibly the most commonly used one is direct one-to-one engagements with individual voice actors. So a large number of our clients do have direct relationships with rosters of voice actors that they work with on a regular basis. They'll come to us when they need to extend that easily quickly with other languages or other individuals that they didn't previously work with. And so that's something that you're always going to get the best value for money on. If you've got the time, that's what you should try to work with. Try to foster direct relationships with voice actors, because it'll be a great way for you to get regular work at an affordable rate if you find somebody you like working with. And then finally, you have freelance websites and marketplaces. There's obviously lots of common ones, but the big ones, most people know about them. The key thing to remember with using those is that if you want your material to stand out and then you go and get your work done on a really big, huge global freelance marketplace, just remember that your competitors might have used them. That voice might be recognized in 1,000 different markets in a myriad of different ways. And if they know how much they paid for that voiceover, it'll also mean that people will make that judgment about you. So just keep that in mind when you're using a cheap sort of freelance marketplace, that there's an association that you may not want your brand to be associated with for a project like that. And then lastly, there's translation and localization firms. Effectively, we do fall into that category because we provide translation and localization all the time. But there's some very big firms out there. Some of them have almost $1 billion in turnover. They do a great job at translating work for a whole vast range of different types of work and projects. And voiceover is something that they've done and offered for a very, very long time. A lot of that work still gets subcontracted. It gets subcontracted to companies like ours. But if you want the peace of mind of working with a big company, they're certainly the party that you would go to for something like that. So if you don't have a script and you're still trying to prepare a budget, and you want to know what a budget could be, of course, you don't have to go all over the web looking for information. You can just call a company like ours and say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. Can you give me some ballparks? It doesn't mean you have to go work with us on that project. I still think it's a worthy conversation, because you'll learn at least a rough estimate of what will be involved or what you can expect to pay for a job. And I think that it can be quite daunting for somebody who's never done this before, because there's so many different choices and options and considerations that it can just become they can just feel a little bit overwhelmed. But again, I know that many of you probably have done this before, so it's maybe not as big a consideration. So we've got some principles and guidelines that we feel make the whole process, easy and quick, and pretty rewarding if you follow them. And maybe there'll be some information in here that helps. So the first thing I'd say is, what is the best way to prepare? Well, okay, those of you who've done this before will know you've got to have a draft or finished script ready. It doesn't have to be exactly finished, but it has to be as close to. The word count has to be close enough, and we have to be able to have enough information from that script to be able to show that, whether it's through NDA or not, to a voice actor who you like or want, or that we're considering putting forward, so that we know what we're working with. The next thing that you're going to need to do is define a voice profile, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a moment. And finally, you've got to have a brief on how you want to manage the recording. Those are the two things I really want to go into here, just so that you've got that right and you know what you're working with. So when I say defining a voice profile, what I'm really talking about is, do you have a preference related to the age or to the gender or to the pitch or the accent? I mean, if there's a local accent that you're looking for, that might best simplify or personify or embody the qualities of somebody that you're looking for. Or if you want somebody that's going to be more neutral sounding and world traveler type for maybe a global audience, it really is important to be specific about accent. And you can be specific because there's sites like ours that specialize that. You don't have to necessarily go, oh, this is what I think I can get because this is the agency I always talk to, and therefore, we'll just work with that. You can be picky. There's so much choice out there. The other thing that you should consider when you're creating a voice profile is whether they have a specific background of vocation. We get asked some startling things, like, we got asked once for someone who was an actual grandmother because they wanted to make sure that she had, I don't know, grandmotherliness in her bones. I couldn't tell you exactly what the reason was for it, but that's what they wanted. People are looking for authenticity. And so if you have ideas about their background or something that they've experienced and been through, that's certainly something that you can leverage, particularly when you go to a site that has a lot of voice actors like ours. It's going to give you the option and the ability for us to say, hey, here's some options for people who've done exactly like that, or who've been exactly in that field or worked in that industry, or they've lived through that experience. So sometimes the easiest way to identify a voice actor is actually to identify what you don't want. Now, in our site, we use a sort of a whole advanced filtering system that's based on demo samples. And so if you are on our site, you'll find that there's a little advanced button next to the go button. And if you click on that, that will drop down a whole series of different attributes that you can define as to what you're looking for. Now, one of the things that's most important is to say, well, don't get too granular, because if you get too picky, looking for your needle in a haystack, you might find that the needle just doesn't exist, or at least there isn't one. We have 60,000 samples, but there might not be a sample that matches your exact criteria, whether it's because of the language or the dialect, or where they're based, or the style or whatever. What we would suggest is focus on the tone. It doesn't matter if somebody has done a read for a different type of audience or a different type of medium. When you're listening to a sample where someone's done a commercial read, as opposed to maybe someone doing a documentary read, what's really going to matter is the tone. And we really strongly recommend that you focus on that. The next thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that you're clear about how you're going to manage the recording. So I'm just going to quickly jump through this so that we've got that. I know we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that this is in. So first, prepare any relevant pronunciations you have. If your script contains acronyms or abbreviations, things that need to be pronounced in a certain way, that's really important. Define the audience of the speaker. The actor or voice actor, they need to get into character. They need to understand what is the audience qualities? What are they looking for? What is the position of the voice in relation to the audience? So think about defining the audience. That's important. The next thing would be to share any reference material. If you've gone to the effort of securing or composing a soundtrack, or you should share that. Or if you have a particular piece of video content that you feel captures the essence or impact that you're also aiming for, then you'll get the best delivery from a voice actor who understands the theme or the effect that you're aiming for. The next thing I would say is identify in advance if line reading is required, okay? So if the session allows for line reading, I mean, it's also referred to as cold reading, which is when the voice actor reads out on site. You'll want them to know this ahead of time, particularly if there's, if you're working to obviously a time constraint. There is nothing worse than sitting in silent disapproval of a performance when the vast majority of voice actors will be more than happy to do some line reading to get that performing tone for you just right. Two more things. First, clarify the file format of how you want the audio files tracked and labeled. That's really, really important, because particularly if you're working with someone directly, they deliver the stuff in the wrong format at the last minute. It all leads to frustration. So get that right. And then finally, I would say decide who will direct. There is nothing worse than a voice actor sitting in a web conference or in a studio with 15 old people all giving different information. Pick one person who's going to be the primary conduit for providing the feedback and the guidance, and that can work really, really well. Lots of people, it doesn't. So basically, that kind of covers really what we would say are the basic things that you should have prepared when you're going to approach getting a voiceover. Once you're in that process, you're going to follow the same basic steps no matter where you go, no matter what platform you're using or agency. You're going to have to go through searching and sourcing, casting and shortlisting, booking and ordering, recording and directing, and then finally editing and cleaning. A company like ours will do all of those things for you. If you're doing that yourself with direct voice actors, make sure you do each of those steps correctly, and make sure that you've got a sound engineer to get rid of all those offensive pops and clicks and shuffling, and make sure that it's not over compressed so that you get a nice, clean, crisp audio file. So in summary, I would say that these are the kind of preparatory steps that will make a world of difference if you're working to a sharp deadline. But most importantly, it allows the voiceover to do a really good, effective job. It becomes the finishing crown jewel for your content. And for those who've had years of experience commissioning voiceover work, I hope this has maybe provided a little bit of help. And if you're new, this probably gives you lots to consider. But just remember that if you're working with experienced providers, the whole process is normally really smooth and easy and fun.
Perfect. Thank you, Miles, for running us through. I feel like we've had a whistle-stop tour of all things voiceover and all those steps we should take to source a great voiceover. Because as you said, it is super important because it can literally make or break your video. However much time or money you've invested in it, you want that final piece to be just right to bring it all together. So I think some really useful points in there. And I've been monitoring the questions as we've been going through, and I can see we've had some already. So of course, if you have any other questions, do start adding them in the box, but we will start working through. So let me just get into these. So we've had a question from Angela who asks, do you think it's a good idea to add silly voices or impressions to characters in your animation? So do you have any advice on that for sort of the quirkier characters?
Yeah, I think that anything that makes your material memorable is worth doing. And, it's kind of like applying comic relief in any situation. If you can offer a bit of comic relief, then that's fun. It makes it memorable. And so I would say, as a rule of thumb, anything that makes your work stand out is good. Obviously, there's going to be contexts where silliness is not good. If you're giving a safety training video on COVID, then that's not something you should be silly about. But if you're doing a video that you're trying to kind of leave a kind of a lasting impression, then I think anything that adds a bit of humor and a bit of life is worth doing. I mean, keep in mind that also you don't necessarily have to be writing that into your script. If you do have a script that you're working with, or if you're a producer producing a script, there's ways that you can ask the voice actor that can effectively lighten up at certain points to keep the audience feeling kind of like this is an enjoyable experience rather than a dictatorial one or an authoritative one. But I think it's always going to depend on the context. And so, in summary, I would say, if you think it's relevant, then yes. But obviously, there's certain places where definitely no.
Perfect. So we've had another question from John who's asked, when you're indexing a voice sample, is it you that's creating the description of the profile, or does the voice actor do that?
Right, that's a good question. All the samples that get uploaded to our site get indexed independently by the voice actor who created them. And so they will upload that material. We, however, quality moderate and check everything. And so if we feel that someone has misindexed something, like they've classified something as promotional when it's not, or they've said that something is a narrative read and we don't feel that it is, then we will modify some of those attributes. But for the most part, it is done by the voice actors themselves. And that indexing obviously serves a very, very important purpose, because it's what allows for granular search to take place on our site. And that's something that you really can't find anywhere else. And that's for, like I said, it's not about saying, hey, you have to come to us. It's the process of elimination and understanding what you don't want. And when you listen to things that have been indexed consistently in a way that you start to think, you know what? I don't like that attribute. Every time I hear that attribute in that indexing, I don't like it. Sometimes knowing what you don't want is going to help you get closer to what you do want, and finding out what those consistent attributes are. And so whether you ultimately come back to us and say, I want somebody with this tone, with this pitch, in this style, that's something that once you kind of know what that is and you've really identified it, at least as a producer, it makes a big difference no matter who you go to, because we all speak the same language in that respect.
Nice. So actually on that note, we've had a comment from Carl saying, I've seen a high-profile TV commercial with a voiceover that I would argue is incredibly irritating and poor by professional standards. Is there a case for a company specifically choosing such a voice as it sticks, even for the wrong reasons, therefore reminding us of the advert? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's got their own feelings on what's annoying. For a long time, people hated the Go Compare adverts because they hated that guy's voice. But then, strangely, kind of the wider public almost endeared themselves to his annoyance. So I think that if you are, working with something, if you're a producer who's created something that's annoying, I'd like to think that that's intentional and not unintentional. Because if it's unintentional, and it does happen, it's really just a big gaffe and a big waste of money, and it's going to make you memorable for the wrong reasons, like people are going to associate you with incompetence. But when it's done intentionally, it can be a very effective way to be remembered. I think the key thing is that if you are going to make something that's annoying, be prepared to be consistently annoying for a long time, so that people just decide that they're going to kind of accept that and learn to love it somehow. And I can't guarantee it's going to work. I wouldn't advise it. But some people do.
Sounds like a risky strategy, but we definitely all know the go compare sound, so there's clearly something in it. We've had a question from Bill asking, what are the biggest mistakes that people make when they're recording their own voiceovers? So are there a couple of things that people should avoid just straight off the bat?
Yeah, I think if there's are we speaking as, sorry, just to clarify, are we speaking as a voice actor or as a producer, because it has different
I
different
think
meaning.
if we just assume like an amateur who's literally recording
Okay,
their own voiceover, just some
right.
quick tips.
Yeah, okay. So if you are recording your own voiceover onto a video, the same things that I've suggested in this are things that you should apply effectively to yourself. The key thing that you need to make sure is that you've got the right equipment and the right environment that you're recording under. And that's the most important thing, because a really great voice can sound awful if it's not in the right environment. And a really poor voice is going to sound even more awful if it's in the wrong environment. But when it comes to the actual audio you're recording itself, I would say, and certainly if you were, for instance, uploading a clip to our site to be considered as a voice actor, it's really important generally to upload clean reads. And when I say clean reads, it would mean like a naked read. There's no background audio or music. Don't get me wrong, there's certain times where adding background music or sound effects can really help kind of jazz up the sound of your voice, maybe even make it look like you've been part of something that's big budget, which will help someone who's considering you as a voice actor think, hey, this person is experienced enough to deal with with real budgets and real projects, serious stuff. But for the most part, when people are listening to a voice actor and what they're trying to imagine is how that person's voice is going to sound with their script. They're trying to think, how is this person gonna talk to my audience? And in that respect, if you've got background music, you could be killing that opportunity, because they're listening to that audio and they're going, no, no, no. So I would say generally avoid background audio, do pure recordings. And if you don't have the ability to spend a bit of time editing the material yourself, take it to an audio engineer and get it cleaned up. Spend a little bit of money to make sure that the material that you're uploading to sites or presenting to agencies is of a high enough standard that when somebody listens to it, they'll say, that's great. And they're just hearing your voice at the standard that they would expect to hear it at, and not something less than that. Because we reject samples and audio all the time that's been recorded on phones, recorded on devices that are not correct. And also people who've put in like 20 seconds of material before they even start speaking. You got to avoid that stuff. Get straight into the read. Don't slate the reads with your name and stuff. People don't care about that. They know they know what they're looking for. They want to hear the sound of your voice instantly. So get straight into the read, keep it clean, get it edited.
Cool. We've had another question from John, who's asked, do you provide a guide for new voice actors on indexing?
Wow, okay. That's a good question. I mean, we do have a whole bunch of different, if people go onto our site and they sign up as a voice actor, there is a whole range of different articles that we've referenced and made sticky so that you can read through them and learn about, what the different attributes kind of mean and how you can optimize your profile around that. The key thing that we wanted to do with the attributes is make sure that if a person has the range and the ability to perform in a variety of different age groups, like if you think about it, Bart Simpson is voiced by Nancy Cartwright. She's an elderly lady, but she's playing the voice of a young boy. And so if you have a vocal range that allows you to perform in different styles or different accents or different ages or pitches, these are all things that allow you to make sure that your versatility can be explored without being typecast because somebody's looked at a profile picture that says, oh, I'm 30 years old and I'm really approachable. I've got a warm, friendly voice, and here's some reels. And that you're in danger of getting not listened to because they listen to the first bit of your audio and they go, no. By having lots of different samples that are indexed separately, you get a much better look at projects that you might not have otherwise got. And so there is guidance in the website. If you sign up and register, it'll help walk you through that process. We've worked really hard to make it as intuitive as possible so that when you're selecting things, it will make sense what you're selecting. But we know that that process can always improve, and we're going to be developing we're going to be releasing some big developments that we've made over the last couple of months that I think will improve that further.
Cool. We've had a question from Ian that is actually about Videoscribe, so I will take that one. He's asked, can I embed more than one voice? I'm guessing it means in a scribe. So you can upload one voiceover track at a time, but what we'd recommend if you want to add multiple voices is to use a separate editing tool like Audacity or something simple, free software like that, to just add the different, if it's characters or different kind of layers in, and then upload that as one file. But we can provide some more guidance on that if it will be helpful in the follow-up information. Okay, we might have time for one more question. Let me just go through. So another question just about Videoscribe from Bess is, when using Videoscribe, do you do voiceover at the end or before building in images, which is faster? I think you can come at this either way. You can obviously build out all your images after, but you'll probably end up doing quite a lot of editing to tie it back to your voiceover. Whereas if you upload the voiceover at the start and then build it around it, you're kind of more guaranteed to get a really nice sync up with what's going on screen. So I'd say it's generally easier to do the voiceover first, but it's also not the end of the world if you do it afterwards. But yeah, so I know we've had a couple of other comments, but I'm conscious of time and letting you get off onto your next calls or meetings, whatever you've got. So we will wrap up there for the questions, and we'll pick up anything else offline, because I can see we've had a few extra bits. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you again to Miles for joining us and sharing your expertise and insights into voiceover. I know there's a whole load of different areas we could cover and information we can share, because it's a seriously meaty topic. But I think this has been a great introduction, and hopefully to everyone who's joined us, thank you for joining us, and I hope you found it useful. If you have any extra questions for Miles and his team, you can contact them at sales@voquent.com. If you have any questions for us or about Videoscribe or any of our software, you can contact myself and our team through marketing@sparkle.com, and we'll get back to you. And as I said, we'll pick up on those questions offline. But otherwise, we hope you have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and hope to see you on another session soon. So thank you again to Miles, and thanks for joining us. Cheers.
Thanks,
bye.
everyone.